Emma's sneakers squeaked against the marble floor as she sprinted down the luxury hotel corridor, her phone clutched in one sweaty palm while the other gripped a paper bag containing someone's very late dinner. The screen glowed with a notification that made her stomach drop. Late delivery. Customer waiting 18 minutes. 18 minutes. One more complaint, and her manager had made it crystal clear. She was done. No second chances, no excuses, just unemployment in a city where rent didn't care about bad luck or wrong turns. She didn't knock. She didn't even look up from her phone as she burst through the ornate door of room 503, her practiced apology already tumbling from her lips. "Sorry I'm so late. Here's your order," and I threw in extra sauce to make up for. The words died in her throat as she finally raised her eyes from the screen. The room wasn't a room at all. It was a vast suite, dimly lit by flickering candles that cast dancing shadows across walls covered in expensive art. A long mahogany table dominated the center, surrounded by men in black suits who sat frozen, their hands resting too close to bulges beneath their jackets. At the head of the table, a man with sharp features and eyes like black ice stared directly at her with an expression that sent every survival instinct in her body screaming. Time seemed to slow as Emma's brain finally caught up with her feet. She tried to backpedal, tried to stammer another apology, but her worn sneakers, cheap things she bought on sale 3 months ago, caught on the edge of an impossibly plush rug. Her arms windmilled uselessly as gravity took over, and she fell forward with all the grace of a newborn giraffe. The paper bag flew from her hand, arcing through the candlelit air in slow motion, and Emma landed with an undignified thump directly onto the lap of the man at the head of the table. Complete silence. The kind of silence that pressed against eardrums and made breathing feel too loud. Emma's face was approximately 3 inches from the man's chest, close enough to smell expensive cologne and something else. Something dangerous, like gunpowder and steel. She could feel every eye in the room boring in her back, could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Someone's glass clinked softly as they set it down. A candle sputtered. Then a man moved. His hand came up slowly, deliberately, and Emma squeezed her eyes shut, certain she was about to die in the most embarrassing way possible. But instead of violence, she felt his fingers grip her shoulder, firm but not painful, and he leaned close enough that his breath tickled her ear when he spoke. His voice was low, deadly calm, with an accent that turned each word into something sharp and precise. "Don't move." Emma's eyes flew open and finally focused on the table itself. Between the crystal glasses and expensive plates sat items that definitely weren't part of any dinner service. Handguns, gleaming and casually displayed like silverware. Her blood turned to ice. This wasn't a business meeting. This was something else entirely. Something that people like her, people who delivered noodles and worried about rent, should never, ever witness. She started, but the man's grip on her shoulder tightened fractionally, a warning without words. He shifted beneath her, and with a smooth, practiced motion that suggested this was far from his first crisis, he lifted Emma off his lap and set her in the chair beside him. His hand moved from her shoulder to her wrist, not releasing, keeping her exactly where he wanted her. The touch was almost gentle, but Emma could feel the steel underneath, the unspoken threat that made her throat close up with fear. The man's entire demeanor changed like a switch being flipped. The cold intensity melted into something warmer, though his eyes remained calculating as they swept the room, measuring every reaction. When he spoke again, his voice carried easy authority and just a hint of amusement. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce my fiancée." "She's early." "Fiancée?" Emma's mind reeled. She opened her mouth to protest, to explain the horrible, terrible mistake, but his fingers tightened on her wrist in warning. The pressure wasn't painful, but it was unmistakable, and when she met his gaze, she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not just a warning, but a plea. "Help me. Play along." Her confusion must have shown on her face because he leaned closer, the picture of a concerned lover, and added, "Darling, you're nervous." Understandable. An older man across the table sat down his wine glass with deliberate precision. His eyes were cold, assessing, the eyes of a predator evaluating prey. His suit probably cost more than Emma, made in 3 months, and his fingers were heavy with gold rings that caught the candlelight. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This is the daughter of the Lee family?" He leaned forward, studying Emma's face with an intensity that made her want to shrink back. "She doesn't look like her photo." The man beside Emma, Jean Huan, she'd heard one of the others murmur, responded without missing a beat, his voice smooth as silk. "She's lost weight. Pre-wedding jitters." His thumb traced an almost imperceptible circle on her wrist, a gesture that might have looked affectionate to observers, but felt more like Morse code. "Trust me. Keep going." The older man's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. Around the table, the other suited men watched with the stillness of coiled snakes, waiting for someone to make a wrong move. Emma felt like a deer that had wandered into a wolf pack, and the only thing between her and those teeth was the man whose lap she'd literally just fallen into. The absurdity of it might have been funny if she wasn't so terrified. "Then she won't mind answering a few questions about her family," the older man said, and it wasn't a question. It was a test, and Emma realized with growing horror that she was about to fail spectacularly. She didn't know anything about the Lee family. She didn't know anything about any of this. She knew how to deliver food on time, how to smile through degrading customer comments, how to stretch ramen 3 different ways when money was tight. She didn't know how to pretend to be someone's fiancée in what was clearly a room full of dangerous men with guns. Jean Huan's jaw tightened fractionally, the only sign of tension in his otherwise composed exterior. Then he smiled, and it was like watching ice crack, beautiful and terrifying. "Of course, Mr. Kwong. Though I hope you'll forgive her if she's a bit scattered. The wedding preparations have been overwhelming." He turned to Emma, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that demanded her complete attention. "Haven't they, darling?" Emma's mouth was dry, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She managed a nod, not trusting her voice. A bead of sweat rolled down her spine beneath her cheap delivery uniform jacket, and she was suddenly, painfully aware of how out of place she looked in this room of expensive suits and deadly calm. Her fingers trembled where they rested on the table, and she curled them into a fist to hide it. Mr. Kwong took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. The silence stretched, pulling taut like a wire ready to snap, and Emma wondered if this was how people felt right before something terrible happened. This hyper-aware clarity where every detail stood out in sharp relief. The flicker of candlelight on gunmetal. The way Jean Huan's fingers remained locked around her wrist. The smell of expensive food going cold on crystal plates. The weight of too many eyes watching, waiting for her to make a fatal mistake. Jean Huan broke the tension with a laugh that sounded almost genuine, tilting his head toward Emma with an expression that managed to convey both affection and possession. "Remember when we first met at your father's estate in Busan, darling? You were so nervous then, too." Emma's brain stuttered over the word Busan, trying to grab onto any context she could. Was that important? Should she know something about Busan? She forced her facial muscles into what she hoped was a smile and not a grimace of pure panic. "Why, yes, Busan." It was memorable. The words had barely left her mouth when another man, younger than Mr. Kwong, but with the same predatory watchfulness, set down his chopsticks with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud. Strange. His voice was deceptively mild. "The Lee estate is in Jeju, not Busan." The temperature in the room plummeted. Emma felt the color drain from her face as every eye fixed on her, and Jean Huan's hand on her wrist turned rigid. She'd said the wrong thing. She'd confirmed their suspicions. And now what? What did men like this do to witnesses who stumbled into their secret meetings? Her mind conjured scenarios from every crime drama she'd ever watched, and none of them ended with her walking out of this hotel alive. But Jean Huan's expression didn't crack. If anything, his smile widened, though it never touched his eyes, which had gone even colder. "I was testing her." His voice carried a razor's edge now, dangerous and sharp. And she passed. My fiancé knows better than to confirm details to strangers, even under pressure. Isn't that right, darling? The message was clear. He'd deliberately fed her wrong information to see if she'd correct it in front of these men. Emma latched onto the lifeline he'd thrown her and nodded, trying to project confidence she absolutely didn't feel. I learned from the best, she managed, her voice only shaking slightly. Mr. Kwong studied them both for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gestured to a server who'd been standing motionless by the wall. Bring the first course. It seems our young couple here is eager to move forward with the evening. But his tone suggested he wasn't convinced, not really, and the questions would continue. As servers glided into the room with covered dishes, Jean Huan released Emma's wrist, only to slide his hand under the table where no one else could see. She felt something pressed in her palm, smooth and folded. Paper. While Mr. Kwong was distracted giving instructions to another associate, Jean Huan's fingers moved with practiced efficiency, ensuring the note was completely hidden in her hand. Emma's pulse raced as she carefully, slowly, moved the note to her lap beneath the table's edge. Her hand shook as she unfolded it in her lap, using the distraction of servers placing plates to glance down. The handwriting was precise, efficient. Room is bugged. They're watching for weakness. Play along, or we both die. Both die. Emma's vision swam for a moment, black spots dancing at the edges. She was going to be sick. She was going to pass out. She was going to know? No, she wasn't, because Jean Huan was right there beside her, and for reasons she couldn't fathom, he was protecting her. He could have thrown her to these wolves the moment she fell into the room. He could have let them realize immediately that she was nobody, nothing, just a delivery driver who couldn't navigate a hotel corridor properly. But he hadn't. He'd claimed her as his fiancée, had woven her into whatever dangerous game was being played here, and now their fates were tangled together, whether she liked it or not. She looked at Jean Huan, really looked at him for the first time. His profile was all sharp angles and controlled intensity, the face of someone who'd learned to hide everything behind a mask of calculated composure. But there was something in the set of his jaw, a tension that suggested he wasn't as calm as he appeared. He was improvising too, buying time, and Emma realized with a jolt that he might be just as trapped as she was. Mr. Kwong raised his glass, the crystal catching candlelight. A toast, he announced, and conversations around the table ceased. To the union that will bring our families together. He paused, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably, or tear them apart. Everyone lifted their glasses. Emma's hand trembled so badly that wine sloshed against the crystal's rim, but she managed to bring it to her lips. The wine tasted like ashes and fear, expensive and wrong in her mouth. She'd never drunk anything that cost this much. She'd never worn anything that cost this much. She'd never been anywhere that cost this much. And the cognitive dissonance of sipping wine worth probably $100 while wearing her stained delivery jacket made everything feel surreal, like she'd slipped into someone else's nightmare. Tell us, said another man, this one with graying temples and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. How did Jean Huan propose? It must have been quite romantic, given his reputation. Emma's mind went completely blank. Proposed? What did rich people's proposals even look like? Helicopters? Yachts? Those elaborate flash mob things from viral videos? Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, and she felt Jean Huan tense beside her, readying another save. But something in Emma snapped. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was the sheer absurdity of the situation, but she found words tumbling out before she could stop them. It was private, she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Intimate. Very. Korean. The word felt strange on her tongue, like she was appropriating something that wasn't hers, but she pushed forward. Nothing flashy or public. Just the two of us and... She looked at Jean Huan, finding his dark eyes already fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. And that was all I needed. Jean Huan's expression shifted, something flickering behind the mask. Surprise, maybe, or approval. He picked up the thread smoothly, his voice taking on a warmer tone that almost sounded genuine. I respected her father's wishes. Traditional values matter in our world, after all. His gaze never left Emma's face, and she couldn't tell if he was acting or if there was something real in the way he looked at her. "How touching," Mr. Kwong said dryly. "Young love, so rare in our business." The word business hung in the air, heavy with implication, and Emma didn't need to ask what business they meant. The guns on the table, the careful way everyone spoke, the underlying threat in every exchange. This was the kind of business that ended in headlines and police tape, not quarterly reports and board meetings. A phone rang, shattering the carefully maintained atmosphere. Emma's heart stopped as she realized with dawning horror that the sound was coming from her pocket. Her delivery app, the one that she'd forgotten to silence, blared its cheerful notification ping. "New delivery request, $4.50 order. Accept now." Every head turned toward her. The silence was deafening. Mr. Kwong's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Your phone, Miss Lee." Emma's hand shook as she fumbled for the device, jabbing at the screen to silence it. "Just my sister," she lied, the words tumbling out too fast. "She's excited about the wedding. Won't stop texting." She forced a laugh that sounded strangled even to her own ears. "You know how sisters are." "Indeed," Mr. Kwong murmured, but his expression suggested he knew nothing of the sort, and that he didn't believe a word Emma had just said. His hand moved slightly, and Emma saw other hands around the table drift toward jacket pockets, toward weapons, and she realized they were seconds away from everything falling apart. A door opened. A man entered, younger than the others, with a hard face and efficient movements. He moved directly to Jean Huan's side and leaned down, whispering something in his ear. Emma watched Jean Huan's jaw tighten, saw his knuckles go white where his hand rested on the table. Whatever news he'd just received, it wasn't good. Jean Huan stood smoothly, his hand finding Emma's elbow and applying gentle but insistent pressure. "Gentlemen, if you'll excuse us for a moment, I need to discuss something private with my fiancée." Mr. Kwong waved a hand dismissively, but his eyes tracked their every movement as Jean Huan guided Emma toward an adjoining room. Emma's legs felt like water, barely holding her weight. The moment the door closed behind them, separating them from the watchful eyes and hidden weapons, she jerked away from Jean Huan's touch and backed against the wall, her chest heaving. "Okay," she gasped, her voice rising toward hysteria. "I need to leave right now. I'm not whoever you think I am, and this is insane, and I have 3 more deliveries tonight, and I know exactly who you are." Jean Huan's voice cut through her panic like a knife. A food delivery driver who walked into the wrong room at the worst possible time. Emma's back pressed harder against the wall, her mind reeling. "Then why did you?" The real bride ran away. Jean Huan's words were clipped, efficient, delivered with the same deadly calm he'd maintained at the dinner table. But now, without the audience, Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the barely controlled fury simmering beneath his composed exterior. "This dinner is with my enemies. They're looking for any excuse to start a war. If they know she's gone, they'll assume I rejected the alliance. Hundreds of people die. Innocent people." Emma shook her head, her hands coming up as if to physically push away the weight of what he was saying. "That's not my problem. I didn't sign up for this. I just wanted to deliver some noodles and go home, and..." Jean Huan moved closer, not threatening but intense, and Emma found herself unable to look away from his eyes. They weren't cold anymore. They were burning with something desperate and dangerous. "They saw you," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Every man in that room saw your face. They think you're her, the Lee family daughter, my future wife. If I let you leave now, if I tell them the truth, they'll hunt you down to send me a message. Do you understand what that means?" Emma's throat closed. She understood. She'd seen enough crime dramas, read enough news articles. People like Mr. Kwong didn't leave loose ends. Witnesses were liabilities, and liabilities were eliminated. "I just wanted to deliver noodles," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. For a moment, something almost like sympathy flickered across Jean Huan's face. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold calculation. You're already involved. The moment you walked through that door, you became part of this. I can't change that, but I could try to get you out alive. The door opened again without warning, and the man who'd whispered to Jean Huan earlier, Min, she'd heard someone call him, entered with quick, urgent steps. His face was grave. Boss, they're getting suspicious. Mr. Kwong is asking why you're taking so long with your fiancée. He paused, and Emma saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. And there's more. Mr. Kwong brought the bride's cousin. She'll be here in 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Emma's voice came out as a squeak. The cousin. She'll know I'm a fake. She'll know I'm not. Then we end this before she arrives. Jean Huan was already moving, his mind clearly racing through possibilities, contingencies, escape routes. Emma could practically see him calculating odds and outcomes behind those dark eyes. How? Emma demanded, hysteria creeping back in her voice. How do we end this? We can't just. Jean Huan turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. We convince them the engagement is real. We secure the alliance. They'll get you out safely, but you need to commit. Fully. Emma laughed, a sharp, broken sound. What does fully mean? Because I've already lied to a room full of armed criminals, pretended to be someone I'm not, and drunk wine that probably costs more than my rent. How much more committed can I get? Whatever it takes to sell this, Jean Huan said, and there was something in his voice that made Emma's stomach flip. Can you do that? Emma looked at him, really looked at him. At the sharp angles of his face, the way he held himself like violence was always just beneath the surface, the expensive suit that probably concealed at least one weapon. He was everything her mother had warned her about, every red flag her friends would tell her to run from. But he was also the only thing standing between her and Mr. Kwong's retribution, and something in his eyes told her he was as trapped in this life as she was in this room. She thought about her tiny apartment with its leaking faucet, her job that barely paid rent, the endless cycle of deliveries and complaints and exhaustion that made up her existence. And then she thought about those guns on the table, about Mr. Kwong's cold eyes, about what happened to people who witnessed things they weren't supposed to see. Okay, she whispered. Okay, whatever it takes. Something shifted in Jean Huan's expression. Relief, maybe, or respect. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then follow my lead. And trust me. Trust him. Emma almost laughed again. She didn't even know his full name 12 minutes ago. But she nodded anyway, because what other choice did she have? They returned to the dining room together, Jean Huan's hand resting possessively on the small of Emma's back. The touch was light but deliberate, visible to everyone watching. Emma forced herself to breathe normally, to not flinch away, to play the part of a woman comfortable with her fiancé's touch. Mr. Kwong was in conversation with another man, but his eyes tracked their entrance like a hawk watching prey. Ah, the happy couple returns. I hope everything is resolved. Perfectly, Jean Huan said smoothly, guiding Emma back to her seat. But as they sat, Mr. Kwong's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth whatsoever. Excellent. Because I have wonderful news. I took the liberty of inviting Miss Lee's dear cousin, Hannah, to join us. She was in Seoul for business and was absolutely thrilled at the chance to see you. His eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. She'll be here any moment. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Under the table, her hands clenched in a fist so tight her nails bit into her palms. She turned to Jean Huan, keeping her face carefully neutral for their audience, but her voice was an urgent whisper. What do we do? Jean Huan's expression never changed, but she felt his leg press against hers under the table. Contact, reassurance, or maybe just acknowledgement of their shared doom. Create a distraction, he murmured back. Before Emma could ask what kind of distraction, Jean Huan suddenly stood, his chair scraping against expensive flooring. Every conversation in the room ceased. All eyes turned to him as he reached down and took Emma's hand, pulling her to her feet with gentle insistence. Gentlemen, Jean Huan announced, his voice carrying across the room with authority and something else, something that sounded almost like genuine emotion. Forgive me, but I can't wait any longer." Emma barely had time to process his words before he pulled her close, one hand sliding to the back of her neck, and kissed her in front of everyone. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was the kiss of a man making a statement, claiming something in front of witnesses who needed to believe in its authenticity. Jean Huan's lips were firm against hers, his hand on her neck holding her in place, and Emma's mind went completely blank. She could feel every eye in the room watching them, could sense the shift in atmosphere, could practically hear the mental recalculations happening in Mr. Kwong's head. Her hands came up instinctively, landing on Jean Huan's chest. Whether to push him away or pull him closer, she genuinely didn't know. The kiss lasted exactly long enough to shock the room and not a second longer. When Jean Huan pulled back, his eyes met Emma's for just a moment, and she saw something there that made her wonder if any of this was truly strategy. Then he turned to face their audience, keeping one arm around Emma's waist, and she was grateful for the support because her knees had turned to liquid. "I apologize for the display," Jean Huan said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "But my fiancée and I haven't seen each other in weeks. The wedding cannot come soon enough." Emma stood frozen, her lips still tingling, her mind trying to process what had just happened. Around the table, men shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Another took a deliberate sip of wine. Mr. Kwong's expression had transformed from suspicion to something else. Amusement, perhaps, or satisfaction at seeing Jean Huan display what might be perceived as weakness. "Young love," Mr. Kwong said, his voice dripping with condescension. "How refreshing. Perhaps we should expedite this union. Strike while the iron is hot, as they say." Jean Huan's arm tightened fractionally around Emma's waist. "My thoughts exactly. In fact, I prefer a private ceremony. Family only. Something intimate and meaningful." "Oh, I insist on being present," Mr. Kwong countered, his smile sharp, "as a witness to this historic alliance. After all, this marriage represents the joining of two great families. It deserves proper acknowledgement." Emma felt Jean Huan's carefully constructed plan crumbling in real time. His body had gone rigid beside hers, his mind clearly racing for a new angle, a new strategy. But before he could respond, the door burst open with enough force to make everyone reach for their weapons. A guard stood in the doorway, breathing hard, his face flushed. "Sir, there's been an incident at the East Gate." Mr. Kwong rose smoothly. "All business now." "What kind of incident?" "Possible security breach. We need you immediately, sir. All senior personnel." The atmosphere shifted from tense dinner party to military operation in seconds. Mr. Kwong barked orders, and men began filing out with practiced efficiency, hands on concealed weapons, faces hard and alert. As Mr. Kwong reached the door, he turned back to Jean Huan and Emma with an expression that promised this wasn't over. "Don't go anywhere," he said pleasantly. "I'll return shortly, and I expect to meet the lovely Miss Hannah when I do." Then he was gone, taking most of his men with him. The room felt suddenly cavernous, empty except for Jean Huan, Emma, Min, and two guards stationed at the exits. Emma finally allowed herself to slump, the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright draining away all at once. "Did you plan that?" she asked breathlessly, looking up at Jean Huan. "The security breach?" "No." Jean Huan's expression was grim. "Which means something else is happening. Something we don't control." Min stepped closer, lowering his voice even though the remaining guards were positioned too far away to hear clearly. "Boss, the cousin will still arrive. Even if Mr. Kwong is delayed, she'll." A knock at the door cut him off mid-sentence. Not urgent like the guard's entrance had been. Polite, deliberate. The kind of knock that said the person on the other side had all the confidence in the world. Emma's heart stopped. She looked at Jean Huan, saw her own fear reflected in the tightness around his eyes, and knew without being told that the cousin was here. Early. Of course she was early, because nothing about this nightmare could go even remotely according to plan. "Positions," Jean Huan murmured, and Min moved to stand near one of the guards, casual but ready. Jean Huan's hand found Emma's again, and this time she clutched it like a lifeline, not caring how desperate it made her look. The door opened. A woman entered with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Emma's car, if Emma had owned a car. She was beautiful in a sharp, dangerous way, with perfect posture and eyes that missed nothing as they swept the room before landing on Emma with laser focus. "Cousin," the woman, Hannah, said, her voice melodious and cold at once. "You look different." Emma's mouth was desert dry. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to confess, to beg for mercy. Instead, she forced what she hoped was a natural laugh and not the sound of someone having a breakdown. "New haircut." Hannah moved closer, circling Emma like a shark that had detected blood in the water. "Your voice sounds different too. Lighter. Less." She paused, considering. "Less refined." Jean Huan shifted slightly, positioning himself between Hannah and Emma without making it obvious. "She's been ill. Stress from the wedding preparations. You know how it is. Planning a wedding of this scale takes a toll." "Does it?" Hannah pulled out her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers dancing across the screen. "Then you won't mind if I call your mother to confirm you're here safely? I'm sure she'd want to know you arrived well." Emma's vision tunneled. Her mother, the real bride's mother, who would have no idea who Emma was, who would immediately expose the entire charade. "She's asleep." The words burst out too loud, too panicked. Emma forced herself to modulate, to breathe. "Don't wake her. She hasn't been sleeping well with all the stress and—" "It's 7 o'clock in the evening," Hannah said flatly, her thumb hovering over the call button. "Why would she be asleep?" The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Emma's mind raced frantically. Insomnia, medication, illness, time zones, but every excuse felt transparent, obvious, doomed. Beside her, Jean Huan's hand tightened on hers, and she could feel the tension radiating from him in waves. Then men, sweet, wonderful men, stumbled backward as if he'd been pushed, crashing into an ornate table that held what looked like a priceless Ming vase. The ceramic exploded against the marble floor with a sound like thunder, shards skittering in every direction. "I'm so sorry." Min dropped to his knees, hands hovering over the pieces as if he could somehow reassemble them. "I lost my balance. I didn't mean, boss. I'm so sorry. I'll replace it. The chaos was perfect." Hannah's attention snapped to the destruction, her phone forgotten as she stared at the shattered remnants of what was probably worth more than Emma's entire life. One of the guards rushed over, barking questions at Min. The other guard moved to assess the damage, muttering about alerting Mr. Kwong. In the confusion, Jean Huan leaned close to Emma's ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Service exit through the kitchen. I'll distract them, you run." Emma turned her head, finding his face inches from hers. "What about you?" "I'll handle this. It's not your fight." His eyes searched hers, and Emma saw something there she hadn't expected. Resignation mixed with what might have been regret. He was planning to sacrifice himself to get her out, to face Mr. Kwong's wrath alone, to deal with the consequences of the failed alliance, to probably die in whatever violent way these men handled betrayal. Something in Emma's chest twisted painfully. This man, this stranger who dealt with criminals and carried weapons and lived a life so far removed from hers they might as well have been from different planets, had protected her from the moment she'd literally fallen into his world. He could have let Mr. Kwong's men hurt her. He could have used her as a scapegoat, blamed the mix-up on her incompetence. Instead, he'd claimed her as his fiancée, had shielded her with his body and his words and his carefully constructed lies. And now he was trying to save her again, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. "You protected me," Emma heard herself say, the words coming from somewhere deep and instinctive, a place that had nothing to do with logic or self-preservation. "I'm not leaving you." Jean Huan's expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable flashing across his face before his mask slammed back into place. "Emma, no." She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of determination she'd ever needed to survive in a city that didn't care if she lived or died. "You said we're in this together, so we stay together." For a moment, Jean Huan just stared at her, and Emma wondered if anyone had ever chosen to stand with him before. If anyone in his entire dangerous, violent life had ever said, "I'm staying," instead of running at the first opportunity. Then his hand tightened on hers, and he nodded once, sharp and definite. "Then stay close," he said quietly, and turned back to face Hannah, who was still distracted by Min's theatrical fumbling with the vase pieces. But before Jean Huan could speak, before they could attempt whatever desperate plan he was formulating, the main doors crashed open with enough force to make everyone in the room freeze. A young woman stumbled in, her hair disheveled, her expensive dress torn at the hem, her makeup smeared like she'd been crying. Her eyes were wild, desperate, and when she saw the room full of people, she didn't slow down. She didn't hesitate. She just screamed, "Stop the wedding. I'm not marrying him." The real bride, Ji-yun, she'd come back. The room erupted. Hannah spun around, her phone clattering to the floor. The guards drew weapons, unsure where to aim. Min abandoned his performance with the vase, and Emma felt every muscle in her body lock up as Ji-yun's wild gaze swept the room and landed on her. "Who is that?" Ji-yun pointed at Emma with a shaking hand, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "Why is she sitting where I'm supposed to be sitting?" Hannah's head whipped back to Emma, and the expression on her face shifted from confusion to understanding to cold, deadly fury in the space of a heartbeat. "You're not my cousin," she said, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "You're not even Korean. I can explain." Emma started, but Jean Huan stepped in front of her, his body a barrier between her and the growing threat. "She has nothing to do with this," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people listen even when chaos reigned. "This is between the families, not her. Nothing to do with this." Ji-yun's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. "She's pretending to be me. She's sitting in my place, wearing my identity, and she choked on a sob. "You're protecting her instead of even looking for me. I didn't ask for this." Emma found her voice, stepping out from behind Jean Huan even though every survival instinct told her to hide. "I walked into the wrong room. That's it. That's all I did. Everything else was what?" Hannah's voice cut through Emma's explanation like a blade. "An accident? A coincidence? How convenient that you just happened to walk into a private meeting and just happen to play along with being the bride." "It's the truth," Jean Huan said sharply. Mr. Kwong and his men were already suspicious. "If I'd revealed the bride was missing, if I'd exposed this girl as a witness, you would have started a war," Hannah finished, her eyes narrowing. "So you used her, used an innocent bystander as a shield for your own purposes." The accusation hung in the air, and Emma realized with a sinking feeling that Hannah wasn't entirely wrong. Jean Huan had protected her, yes, but he'd also used her to buy time, to maintain appearances, to serve his own agenda. The kiss, the touches, the carefully orchestrated performance. How much of it had been real, and how much had been cold calculation? The main doors burst open again, and Mr. Kwong strode in with his entourage, his face thunderous. The security breach had apparently been resolved, or perhaps he'd smelled the real crisis brewing here. His eyes swept the scene, the shattered vase, the disheveled real bride, Emma standing exposed, Hannah's furious expression, and his face darkened further. "Would someone," he said with deadly calm, "care to explain what is happening in my presence?" Ji-yun turned to him, and Emma saw the family resemblance in the proud lift of her chin despite her tears. "Uncle Kwong, I won't marry him. I never wanted this alliance. I ran because I can't. I won't spend my life as a bargaining chip in your wars." Mr. Kwong's expression didn't change, but Emma saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. "Your wants are irrelevant, Ji-yun. This marriage represents." "Then who is She?" Ji-yun pointed at Emma again, her voice breaking. "Why was she sitting in my place? Why was he pretending?" "She's nobody," Mr. Kwong said, and the word hit Emma like a physical blow. His eyes fixed on her with the kind of dismissive contempt reserved for insects. A delivery girl who made a fatal error in judgment. Fatal. The word echoed in Emma's mind, confirming every fear she'd been nursing since the moment she'd seen those guns on the table. She wasn't walking out of here. None of Jean Juan's protection, none of his careful planning, none of it mattered now that everything had fallen apart. She has nothing to do with this, Jean Juan repeated, but this time his voice carried an edge of desperation. Let her go. Deal with me if you need to punish someone, but she's innocent. Innocent. Mr. Kwong laughed, cold and mirthless. She witnessed a private meeting. She heard conversations that could destroy us all if repeated to the wrong people. She impersonated my niece. He turned to his men. Secure her. We'll deal with her after we resolve this situation with the bride. Two guards moved toward Emma. Jean Juan shifted, blocking their path, and Emma saw his hand move toward the weapon she'd suspected he carried. Don't, he said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Don't touch her. Mr. Kwong's expression hardened. You would draw a weapon on my men? In my presence? Over a delivery girl? Over someone who doesn't deserve to die for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jean Juan's voice was steel wrapped in ice, and Emma could see the subtle shift in his stance. The posture of someone who'd been trained to kill and wouldn't hesitate if pushed. I'm done with this, Kwong. Done with the alliances, the arranged marriages, the wars over territory that mean nothing. My family's empire was built on blood, and I'm tired of adding to the body count. The room went silent. Even Ji-yun stopped crying, staring at Jean Juan with wide eyes. Mr. Kwong's face went from angry to dangerous, the shift like watching storm clouds gather before lightning strikes. You reject the Kwong family? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more threat than any shout. You reject this alliance? I reject this entire life, Jean Juan said, and Emma heard something in his voice she hadn't before. Freedom, or maybe the desperate hope of it. I'm walking away. From all of it. Mr. Kwong took a step forward, and every one of his men tensed, hands moving to weapons. Then you're a dead man. And so is she. Men. Now. The lights cut out. Complete darkness swallowed the room, and chaos erupted instantly. Shouts. The sound of furniture crashing. Gunshots that made Emma's ears ring. The muzzle flashes painting the room in strobe light horror. She felt Jean Juan's hand find hers in the darkness, his grip iron-strong and urgent. Run, his voice in her ear. And then they were moving, Jean Juan pulling her through the darkness with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every exit, every escape route. Emma stumbled, her worn sneakers catching on expensive carpet, but Jean Juan caught her before she could fall, one arm wrapping around her waist and practically lifting her forward. Behind them, the emergency lights kicked in, dim red glows that turned the corridor into something from a nightmare. Emma could hear Mr. Kwong shouting orders, hear boots pounding against marble as guards gave chase. Her lungs burned, her legs screaming in protest, but Jean Juan's hand in hers was an anchor, pulling her forward when her body wanted to collapse. I can't keep up, she gasped, but Jean Juan's response was immediate. Yes, you can. Stay with me, Emma. Just stay with me. They burst through a door into a kitchen that looked like a war zone. Chefs scattered, dropping pans and utensils as Jean Juan dragged Emma through the chaos. A guard appeared, blocking the service exit with a gun drawn and a grim smile on his face. Going somewhere, boss? Jean Juan didn't slow. He released Emma's hand, and before the guard could react, Jean Juan had closed the distance and disarmed him with movements so fast Emma barely tracked them. The gun clattered across tile, and the guard slumped unconscious. Another guard came from the side, and Emma's body moved on pure instinct. She grabbed a heavy pan from a counter and swung it with all the desperate strength of someone fighting for their life. The impact reverberated up her arms, and the guard dropped. Jean Juan looked at her, something like pride flashing across his face. Nice swing. I have 3 brothers. Emma's voice came out shrill with adrenaline and terror, and something that might have been hysterical laughter. They crashed through the service exit into an alley that smelled like garbage and rain and freedom. A black car screeched to a halt beside them. Men behind the wheel with blood on his face, but determination in his eyes. Get in, he shouted, and they didn't need to be told twice. Emma dove into the back seat, Jean Huan right behind her, and before the door even closed, Min was flooring it. Bullets pinged off the reinforced windows, spiderwebbing the glass, but not breaking through. Emma ducked instinctively, her hands over her head, and felt Jean Huan's body cover hers, shielding her even now. The car careened through Seoul's streets, taking turns too fast, running lights, and leaving chaos in its wake. Emma couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only hold on to Jean Huan and hope they survived the next 10 seconds. Eventually, minutes or hours later, Emma couldn't tell. The car stopped at what looked like an abandoned warehouse in a part of the city she didn't recognize. Min killed the engine, and silence crashed over them like a wave. Emma's ears were still ringing from the gunshots, her body shaking with aftershocks of adrenaline. "We're clear for now," Min said quietly, wiping blood from a cut over his eye. "But they'll be searching everywhere. Boss, we need to move soon. Get out of the city, maybe out of the country." Jean Huan nodded, but his attention was on Emma, who sat trembling in the back seat, her cheap delivery uniform stained and torn, her face pale. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her arms, checking for injuries with surprising gentleness. "No, I don't think so." Emma's voice cracked, and suddenly everything hit her at once. The terror, the violence, the kiss, the escape, all of it crashing down until she couldn't hold it back anymore. "What happens now?" "They'll come after you. After us. They know what I look like. I'll protect you," Jean Huan said, his voice steady even as his world burned down around him. "New identity, new city, if necessary. Whatever it takes to keep you safe. I don't want to run." The words surprised Emma, even as she spoke them. She looked at Jean Huan, really looked at him. This man who'd protected her, who'd kissed her, who'd chosen her survival over his own safety. "I don't want to spend my life looking over my shoulder." "Then what do you want?" Emma's eyes met his, and she found herself thinking about that kiss in the dining room, about the way his hand had felt in hers as they ran for their lives, about how in the space of a few hours this stranger had become the only real thing in a night full of lies. "I want to know if that kiss was just for show." Jean Huan's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through the cracks in his armor. He reached for her, his hand cupping her face with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "Does this answer your question?" He kissed her again, and it was nothing like the performance for Mr. Kwong's benefit. This was real, desperate, and gentle, and full of something Emma was afraid to name. His other hand tangled in her hair, and Emma's hands found their way to his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing as fast as her own. Min cleared his throat from the front seat. "Boss, we really need to move. Mr. Kwong's men are searching the area." Jean Huan pulled back slowly, reluctantly, his forehead resting against Emma's for a moment. "Last chance," he said quietly. "I can get you out of this completely. Give you money, a new start somewhere safe where none of this touches you. Or," he hesitated, and Emma saw uncertainty in his eyes for the first time. "Where you stay. Help me dismantle this empire from the inside. Expose the corruption, protect the innocent people caught in these wars. But it won't be safe. It will probably be the most dangerous thing you've ever done." Emma thought about her tiny apartment, her delivery job, the small, safe life she'd been living. Then she thought about Jean Huan facing his enemies alone, about all the other innocent people who might stumble into the wrong rooms, about how sometimes the most important things weren't safe at all. She smiled, feeling something fierce and bright unfurling in her chest. "I accidentally sat on a Mafia boss's lap tonight," she said. "Safe left the building hours ago." Jean Huan's lips curved into something that might have been a real smile, the first she'd seen from him. "Then let's finish what we started." They got in the car together, men pulling away from the warehouse as dawn began to break over Seoul. Emma looked back once at the city where her old life had ended and her new one had begun, then turned forward, her hand finding Jean Huan's in the space between them. She'd come to deliver food. Instead, she delivered herself into the most dangerous and unexpected night of her life. And somehow, sitting beside this man who'd protected her when he had no reason to, who'd chosen her over an empire, she didn't want it to end. This was just the beginning. 6 months later, Emma watched from a safe distance as federal agents raided the Kwong family's headquarters. Beside her, Jean Huan's hand was steady in hers as they witnessed the empire's collapse. An empire they'd systematically exposed through careful documentation, testimonies for victims, and evidence that couldn't be ignored. The real bride, Ji-yun, had started a new life in Paris, finally free to choose her own path. And Emma? She'd quit food delivery after that first night. Instead, she'd become Jean Huan's partner in the truest sense, not just in love, but in purpose. Together, they worked to dismantle corruption from the inside, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, turning Jean Huan's insider knowledge into justice instead of violence. Some wrong turns lead you exactly where you're meant to be. Emma had walked into the wrong room and found the right life. Dangerous, unpredictable, but undeniably hers. The lesson. This story reminds us that life's greatest transformations often come from our most unexpected moments. Emma's wrong turn wasn't a mistake. It was destiny disguised as chaos. She teaches us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but choosing to stand for what's right even when every instinct screams to run. Jean Huan shows us that it's never too late to reject a path that doesn't serve your soul, no matter how deeply you're entrenched. Together, they prove that real connection transcends circumstances, that protection goes both ways, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust a stranger who sees our worth when we've forgotten it ourselves. Their story whispers a truth we often forget. The wrong room might just be the right door to a life you never knew you needed. Thank you for joining Emma and Jean Huan on this wild journey through danger, deception, and unexpected love. May you always have the courage to stay when others run, to fight when others surrender, and to find beauty in the chaos that changes everything.